So you come and you cue me in now because this thing is frozen here. I can't see when I'm supposed to start. 2, 1. Thank you so very much for joining us. Now let's move straight to our main conversation for today. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited, Nnpcl, reported a profit after tax of 185 billion naira for July of 2025, with monthly revenue reaching 4.4 trillion naira. Between January and June of 2025, the company also remitted 7.9 trillion naira to the federal government. Average daily crude oil and condensate production was 1.7 million barrels, while gas production averaged 7.722 million standard cubic feet per day. Nnpcl stated that all financial figures are provisional and unaudited, covering only its own operations and excluding independent operators under the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, NUPRC. On infrastructure, the Ajaokuta-Kaduna-Kano AKK gas pipeline is 83% complete, while the Obiafu-Obrikom-Oben OB3 pipeline stands at 96% completion. A 113-kilometer section of OB3 is already delivering 300 million standard cubic feet of gas daily, mainly from AHL and other suppliers. We still have Emeka Majunagu. Thank you so very much, Emeka, for hanging around.
Thank you very much.
All right. So let's get talking. Emeka, isn't it quite suspect, highly suspect, that abruptly the NNPC is declaring a profit of 185 billion naira just for July, while in the last 8 years under Mele Kyari, NNPC could not even say this is what they have for Nigeria as profit?
Yeah, thank you very much. You took the words out of my mouth, really, because just recently, the Senate asked NNPCL to account for 210 trillion naira, for between 2017 and 2023, and I think the Senate gave NNPC, just a minute. The Senate gave NNPCL, 3 weeks to respond to that query, but up till now, the query about the discrepancy in its audit reports for 2017 to 2023. But up till now, the NNPC has not told us, that it has responded to that query. All of a sudden, we see this very fantastic report. Well, if I'm to take them at their word, I think, yes, congratulations to them, on their self-declared achievement. But there are still a lot of issues. There are still challenges. There are still, unresolved issues. This 210 trillion naira audit discrepancies, they have a lot to do with consumer confidence, investor confidence, and full commercial viability. People want accountability. It is a sine qua non, in an economy that wants to be taken seriously. So NNPCL should put the horse before the cat. Let it respond to the audit queries, and then tell us, out of all of this, very fantastic stuff it has put up, let it also tell us, how come, its profit after tax plunged 80% in July, under cost pressures. It is, the story is out there in the public domain, that it posted a steep 79.6% drop in profit after tax, sliding to 185 billion naira in July 2025 from 905 billion in June, according to its latest monthly financial and operational report. Now, the NNPCL claimed that the slump was driven largely by movements, cost of sales, and income tax adjustments, which offset steady revenues and stable production. Group-wide revenue, and that's according to Business Day, fell marginally to 4.41 trillion naira in July, compared with 4.57 trillion naira a month earlier. And then quoting Nnpcl, all production, sales, and financial figures are provisional and subject to reconciliation of relevant stakeholders. So it also stated that crude oil and condensate production edged up to 1.7 million barrels per day for 1.68 million barrels per day in June. Natural gas output also increased, rising to 7.722 million standard cubic feet per day from 7.581 million standard cubic feet per day, and all of that. So you see, all these things put together, there should be the Nnpcl should tell us, how it is dealing with these issues. And then we also need to, get issues of corruption and mismanagement addressed. There have been protests against the new MD, the new GMD GCO. There have been protests demanding his arrest. What has happened to those queries? We need to know. Then, when you don't resolve issues of alleged financial mismanagement, how do you boost investor confidence, in the projects you're talking about? Now, we hear, that even industry reforms is talking about aligning the goals of the Nnpcl with the Petroleum Industry Act. That we are still is still a long way to go. That we need for Nnpcl to open its books. The opacity in Nnpcl's books, cries to the high heavens. So the Nnpcl must look into this, so that it can get the buy-in of stakeholders in the oil industry, labor unions, investors, because Nigeria has a lot of assets. Like people like myself say, we have no reason to have such a huge debt. We have no reason to be borrowing. We have no reason to get loans by oil production. It doesn't help us, given the quantum of resources, unlocked and locked, tapped and untapped resources that we have as a country. We have no reason to have such a humongous debt, because you see, what we can do, just like the United States, if we make the economy more viable, we can get people to invest in the economy rather than using our, crude for forward sales, using our crude for loans, with unhelpful terms, converting a ways and means debt of 30 trillion naira into a 40-year debt that future generations will be saddled with. We don't need to go that route. If Nnpcl, because according to the Petroleum Industry Act, Nnpcl by now ought to have transitioned into a total private entity. Nnpcl ought to have been taken to the stock exchange and its shares sold. But we're still having that, inefficiency, largely engendered by governmental control. It's the same thing you have with the discos and the gencos in the power sector. The government still has 40% in each genco and in each disco. And so you can still see the inefficiencies. Whereas if the discos and gencos actually, if the government can shed its holdings, or maybe reduce its holdings, or turn its holdings into, viable vehicles for huge economic returns to Nigeria, will fare better in the power sector. But a situation where you keep talking about subsidies without addressing the issues, of stakeholder misalignment, then we'll just keep seeing very fantastic figures without commensurate results. Now, the Nigeria Upstream, Regulatory Commission has said that, that it's expecting that by next year, 2026, Nigeria will be on track to achieve a crude oil production target of 2.5 million barrels per day. Saying that the current oil output increased from 1.46 million barrels per day in October 2024 to 1.8 million barrels per day, with momentum building towards the 2026 target. Okay, very good. Now, it's saying that it has shortened contracting cycles, reduced investment risks, and encouraged upstream projects. But without talking about the big elephant in the room, which is that the cost of production in Nigeria is still too high. Saudi Arabia cost of production is $10, but ours is still quite high at over $30. We cannot, we cannot expect, we cannot expect, to make appreciable economic gains, if we are still stuck with a high bill in terms of, as high as $48 per barrel oil production. That's too expensive. That's so expensive. It has to do with rampant oil theft, sabotage, poor infrastructure, including aging pipelines. When Nnpcl says the pipeline network has improved, all right. Operational inefficiencies, high overhead, driven by insecurity and corruption. So that is the big elephant in the room. Oil production. Saudi Arabia, that has more oil reserves than ourselves, cannot be producing at $10 per barrel. And we are stuck at $48 per barrel. Whatever you are saying, just, hey, people are just going to say, look, set all these things aside. The gas you are saying has been improved. How much of it has gone into forward sales? Yes, we've made revenues. Yes, revenues have increased. But side by side, your borrowing has increased. So one must give way to the other so that we don't find ourselves in the situation of Venezuela. Venezuela is in a horrible situation, despite its its huge oil production. We must be very, very careful, because the road to Venezuela is not far off. Its economy is dependent on oil. But these revenues have been mismanaged, despite the fact that Venezuela, under the late Hugo Chavez, touted itself as a socialist country. But, corruption was widespread. Then it now found itself in a messy economic crisis marked by hyperinflation. Decades of, it has been faced with decades of socialist policies, price controls, nationalizing industries, and then you have U.S. sanctions. But even at that, Russia has been under sanctions from the West. But even at that, the Russian economy has not crumbled. Iran has been under sanctions from the West for more than a decade. But the Iranian economy has not crumbled, even though it has been under much strain. But it has not crumbled. Now, these are two oil-producing nations. So we are not under any sanctions. But how are we, how is our economy performing? It's not up to the optimal level, despite all these promises here and there. Thank you.
Very true, Emeka. You said lots of things there that needs to be recorded, because what we see today in Nigeria is the more you look, the less you see. It seems like those who are heading some of this facilities and the system itself are deliberate about destroying the system from the inside. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, when he took over power, we thought he was going to redeem the situation, made himself the substantive minister of petroleum resources, And up until today, he seems not to really care about some of these things happening. The big question is, in some way or another, is the president equally complicit to all the decay that we have?
Well, I know it. I mean, development rises and falls on leadership, no doubt about that. But again, I think too the president was misadvised into making that declaration about the removal of subsidy. I think he was also misadvised into floating the naira. He thought those were going to be win-win situations. Yes, in fairness to him, the Petroleum Industry Act actually said that that by April, the nation should transition, within a period from subsidy-backed, from subsidies. But you see, laws are made for men, like somebody once told me, are not meant for laws. So, nothing stopped him from asking the National Assembly. He could have asked the National Assembly for an amendment to the PIA to say, okay, due to economic challenges and then problems with the liquidity in the Nigerian economy, that okay, can we make a slight amendment to the PIA and give us maybe give us a kind of a window of maybe 6 months or 12 months within which to adjust for subsidy, so in that way, he could have removed the subsidy gradually and then transitioned to other alternatives. Like, CNG. CNG had been there, but previous governments did not really ramp up the transitioning. So we were just left with promises and just half-hearted attempts. They look at electric vehicles, alternatives, even railway, ramping up the expansion of the rail network, So you could have taken a window and said, okay, let's do it gradually. Let it be a gradual thing. Now, you had rampant oil theft, and at the same time, you are floating the naira. Crude oil is your chief export. And so you cannot take to the part of Venezuela that had so much, oil reserves, but yet it was over-reliant on oil prices. That's the problem. It was over-reliant on oil revenues. The economy was not diversified. Hugo Chavez and the current president, Nicolas Maduro, did nothing to diversify the Venezuelan economy. And that's why it collapsed. So we have been talking, successive administrations have been talking of diversifying the Nigerian economy. In fact, diversifying away from the overdependence on crude. If we have viable alternatives, we have solid minerals, we have agriculture, we can ramp up manufacturing. There are even then the talent pool of Nigeria, the human capital that we have, is also a veritable resource. Then you have a big pool of diaspora remittances, which have even been at a higher level than foreign direct investment. But how much have you engaged Nigerians in the diaspora beyond just retaining a commission? Nigerians in diaspora commission, how much have you engaged Nigerians to say, okay, how do we, ensure that these remittances can be a strong driver for our economic reforms? Beyond just, because if you look at it, maybe 80-90% of diaspora remittances go into welfare-related issues. Family issues. Okay, help me buy land, help me build a house. Somebody's sick, somebody needs to pay school fees, somebody needs to pay rent, and all of that. But like India, can we take the example of India to use diaspora remittances, to upscale diaspora remittances, so that, we do much better with our diaspora remittances and ensure that we now gradually reduce, reduce the dependence on oil, the dependence on oil prices. Now, an expert has, an expert has said that oil prices in the fourth quarter of this year will be under $60. That's a major problem because our 2025 budget is predicated on oil price of $75 a barrel. Now, look at diaspora remittances for 2025. The global figure for diaspora remittances was $905 billion. Sub-Saharan Africa received $56 billion. Nigeria in 2024 received $20.93 billion, which is an 8.9 increase from 2023. So now tell me, if you tap that very well, I think if you even look at it, what is the percentage? I mean, you can say, okay, that what Nigeria received, 20.93%. What is the percentage of the total diaspora remittance of $905 billion? That's just a drop in the ocean. But you have Nigerians all over the world, medical doctors, nurses, ICT, name it, in different businesses. If you engage them more constructively, they will increase, into investing in their nation. You will now find out that you have a veritable pool, you have a veritable pool for, investment. But if you just keep sticking to, just the oil revenues, we will continue to borrow. We'll continue to borrow. Look at India for 2024, received $129 billion. That is times 6, almost times 7 of what Nigeria received in 2024. $129 billion. That's what India, what India got as diaspora remittances. Despite these economic challenges. Now, that made it the world's largest recipient of remittances. Year-on-year growth was an increase from $125 billion in 2023 to $129 billion in 2024. So what does that tell you? At $20 billion remittances, we can actually use that as a vehicle to help our nation. And then we can now grow from there. We can grow. How many Nigerians in diaspora are actually investing in money market instruments, in the capital market, in commercial papers, in green bonds? How many? So when you just keep talking about oil dependence, the same Ajaokuta-Kaduna-Kano was, said the other time that Nigeria may consider selling the refineries. Now, it appears pressure has mounted on him and he has walked back on his talk by saying that, that the refineries will work on. How do we just keep immolating ourselves, hurting ourselves because we want to boost the ego and the corruption fueled tendencies of certain people in power? This refinery
it's actually very Emeka, it's actually very important that you are stating, some of these things. Bashir Bayo Ojulari might say all that he wants to say, but of course we know that there are lots of strings that are there controlling whatever it is that he does. And you spoke about diversifying our economy from the petroleum to some others. That can only be possible when the man in charge has no skin in the game. A situation where our president allegedly has a stake, possibly, in Owandu that has gone into upstream and downstream and other streams. Do you ever think it's ever possible to have a diversification to other sectors that you just mentioned now, when there's a strong interest by the man in charge?
Look, let me tell you something. All those are just speculations. I will not want to go into speculations about whether the president has any interest in anywhere or not anywhere. I'd rather deal with hard economic facts, and which is that the oil industry is underperforming. The Nigerian oil industry can actually do much, much better if we set ourselves, to the goal of maximizing the opportunities, available to us. We can do much better. The pipeline network is actually dead to all intents and purposes. Why? Because of incessant vandalism. That is why you see tankers, everywhere. That is why Dangote has, for instance, rolled out 4,000 CNG-powered trucks, to distribute power. And look at the effect on our roads. So every year, government has to put in billions of naira, on revamping the roads, and yet all of that is lost to the heavy axial load put on the roads. What are we actually doing? We need to ask him the hard questions. And what are you doing concerning reviving the pipeline network? Is it not shameful that Nigeria, has abandoned the pipeline distribution of petroleum products? The distribution of petroleum products through pipelines? It's shameful. We must do something about it. We cannot say because vandals are. We must do something about it. And the pipeline network is decrepit. So what it means is that we may need to lay new pipelines, at certain points. We need to do that so that we can reduce, the cost of freighting pipeline products. They're real. Of course, we can freight pipeline products by rail. So what it means is that if we want to because rail is not a very profitable venture worldwide. So we have the opportunity to say, okay, fine, we will not depend only on tankers. We will also extend to rail. Now, we will now break that, deadlock of, vertical rail lines. And now let this government now be in line, in history, to have inaugurated Nigeria's first horizontal rail network. There's no horizontal rail network at all. It's all vertical, from south to north. So what about south to south? We have north to north, yes. But what about south to south? Why are we, even in the north to north, do you have a rail network, for instance, from Kwara to, let's say, Taraba? Do you have from, let's say, Kebbi, from Kebbi to Borno, bringing Kebbi to maybe Maiduguri? Do you have that? Or to Dutse? Do you have that? So then coming to the south, from Lagos to Onitsha to Port Harcourt, do you have that? You don't have that. So you can keep spending all the billions you like. You will not get optimal results. And that is where the problem is. They know all these problems. But you see, because of grandstanding and corruption, grandstanding fueled by corruption is what we are having in the nation. That's why you see, instead of facing the problems we have, they are talking of 2027. They're engaging in bigotry, engaging in hateful rhetoric, as if power, as if they have a birthright to rule Nigeria. It's wrong. It's wrong. And that's why you see underwhelming performances. They cannot really rise above the dismal showmanship they're engaging in. That's why you see the Senate gave Ajaokuta-Kaduna-Kano 3 weeks to, explain the discrepancies in the accounts for all these reports for 2017, 2023. The next thing, he rolled out, a report saying that is not what you were asked. Do things one after the other. Respond to the Senate query first. So that, in fact, in responding to the Senate query, I thought he would have even used the opportunity to bring out that report. Say, okay, fine, distinguished senators, okay, these are these are my explanations, and then to show you that we've done this and that. But even within your report, you are clearly showing that you're just making a play on figures. Your profit after tax dropped by 80%. What is that? What is that? Do we keep, for how long can we sustain this? We have forward sales. We have used our crude oil to take loans that are not necessary. You can't even trace what was done with the money. And then somebody is telling us that performance has increased and all of that. Come on, people need to look beyond the figures, unless we want to be sounding boards for government propaganda. But I don't want to be counted in such. Thank you.
Emeka, you have said all, and I think it's very important for historical facts here. The upstream pipelines, after the discovery of oil in Olobiri, current-day Bayelsa State, it started in 1950. And from the 70s, we had the downstream pipelines from 1970 to 1979, which even made it better. And that was when the downstream oil pipelines crisscrossed different parts of the country. We had the Escravos to Lagos also, pipelines which is leading to the Kaduna-Kano and Ajaokuta. Now, all of these things are very so important, but because of those in authority, rather would love to damage our roads because of the little money they make. They would often love to throw away all of these pipelines laid by military administrators. And now we have a democratic setup that we thought would even do 7 times better than what the military have done, in the 70s by allowing the downstream oil pipeline crisscross different sects of the country. But rather than have that, we have a democratic setup that are more fixated on buying trucks, damaging our roads, killing people, than have the most important thing done. Actually very sad that we're living at a time like this with the kind of leaders in charge of policies and governance in Nigeria. We hope for better days and believe that it will get better. Thank you so very much, Emeka, for being part of our show today. All right, people, that's just about the time we have. I'd love to say thank you. Please do well to visit us. You can find us at enterprisetvnews.com. You may equally like, comment, and follow us on all our social media platforms at Enterprise TV7. I am Henry Igwebike. Thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.